Hello, my name is Logan and I'm your host, the Mighty Pirate. In today's video, I'm going to discuss the Star League. My sources for today's video is the Star League sourcebook, published in January 1989. While the Star League era is often spoke of as a time of peace and super science, it only lasted from 2571 to 2751, a mere 180-year time span. Many of the characters, heroes, and villains of this time have been exaggerated to fill more of the mythology and political propaganda that justifies each great house's rule. Lots of the stories related to this time are also anecdotal, blaming the long history of Battletech's universe as why the story is incomplete. In the beginning of the Battletech timeline, the year is 2011, where an internal power struggle within the USSR split the Russian forces into two parties, while the world watched with concern as each side threatened the use of the nuclear arsenal. NATO forces invaded Czechoslovakia and Poland, followed by an additional invasion force arriving from the port city of Riga. The conservative of the two Soviet factions ended up falling, leaving the United States mostly uncontested for political rule. The remaining nations saw this and banded together to create the Western Alliance. Initially, the alliance brought America into the fold, using economic sanctions and the boycotting of American goods to ultimately bring 80% of the world's remaining nations into the alliance by 2086, with all remaining nations serving as cheap labor or manufacturing hubs. The vassal nations were very aware of this inversion of trade and resources. This led to mass organized destruction of factories, infrastructure, as well as less organized acts of mass violence. It was the few nations versus the world, aptly named the Terran Alliance. As the world was in turmoil, the media played a blind eye to it, the average citizen completely unaware of the exploitation of the neighbor nations. The world was distracted by breakthrough inventions. Fusion reactors, 1/10 the size of previous eras, allowed entire cities to be powered for a fraction of the cost, and even allowed for surplus power to be used to clean up environments, and led to the colonization of Mars and Venus using the same technologies that restored the environment on Earth. The acceptance of the possible and the unknown allowed science and religion to both intermingle, making the people of Terra very religious, with many of the writings of the time expressing a duty to art, exploration, and new discoveries. All of the Earth's old religions were held close by most of the citizens as an anchor to their home world of Earth. Though mankind was at its worst and its best, what would see it out of its cradle solar system was the discovery of the Kearney-Fukushima pan-dimensional gravitational mathematics in 2102. By the end of 2108, the Terran Alliance spacecraft Pathfinder made a successful round-trip voyage from Earth to the Tau Ceti system. The ruling class of Earth saw this as a new frontier and commissioned for full-size colony ships and exploration ships. The already economically strapped nations saw more acts of violence across the world as additional taxes were laid to fund this exodus. Many of the people that were most upset with the Terran government were the first to volunteer to be anywhere but Earth. With the development of these colony-sized jump ships, it was possible by 2116 Tau Ceti IV was renamed to New Earth and was the first of many colony worlds. 56 years later, when the first Grand Survey reported it had identified over 100 worlds, and 63 years later, when the fourth Grand Survey was completed, they had fully identified 600 worlds. As the urge to go new places pulled humanity away from its cradle, Earth did just as much to push its citizens away. One of the main issues of this time was the inability to enforce its rule across the stars. By the 22nd century, many colonies, many light years away, were becoming independent and no longer wanted to pay tribute to Earth. Whenever one of these colonies would arise, the Terran Alliance would cut off water supplies. This brought many of the independent colonies to heel during this time. The maps of this time are drawn and redrawn to explain the many alliances, treaties, and uprisings of this era. The Terran Alliance's control would remain uncontested until 2177, when the Ryan Cartel formed its own fleet of independently owned iceberg haulers. This broke the chokehold that Terra had over its many colonies. This led ultimately to two groups in Terran government, the expansionists and the liberals. Each claimed moral superiority over the other. The ruling party, the expansionists, believed in the authority of the state to rule over Terrans on any world. With ample funding from starship manufacturing, this party was well funded and ruled over the Terran alliance for most of the 22nd century, and had no qualms of using force to achieve its means. The Liberal Party stood for everything that the expansionists opposed, believing that the individual is good and worthy of preserving. But time and time again, when they had the chance to implement change, they performed a minor goal while furthering the expansionists' power. Eventually, they simply adopted the tactics of the expansionists, securing funding from the private sector to help create a uniparty for nearly a century. Opportunity knocked on Earth's door in 2236, when a coalition of planets on the edge of known space declared independence. Not wanting to cause a chain of insurrections, the coalition forces wanted to respond with extreme force. The catch is, in a utopian state of peace and superscience, there wasn't much of a standing army. The liberals had been pushing for disarmament for some time. Only the planetary marine force had the means of traveling, securing, and making it back from the rebellious worlds at this time. The Marines left not long after with high hopes of expecting just to take down a few radicalized rebels on each of the worlds. The Marines assumed that their superior firepower, training, and equipment would make short work of the rebellion. 18 months later, the remaining Marine vessels returned to Earth defeated. The debrief was a nightmare for all brass and government officials that attended. The Marines noted that they had suffered extreme losses, though that the rebels had suffered more. Limited maps and information that they had on these distant worlds was useless or worse, misleading. The part of the debrief that was most terrifying to the officials was that the rebels were organized, highly motivated people that would rather die than return to the fold. That will conclude this week's video. I'll be working on this project and many more. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you on the battlefield.